September 1975. Two con men swindle millions of pounds and vanish without a trace. The case is going cold until psychic Bob Cracknell has a vision.
They're living in a cave. And they said, where? I said, Scotland.
No one believes him. The police think he's a crank.
You deal in facts and that's it.
But time is running out. Can the psychic find the con men before their innocent victims lose everything? The strange story of the two preachers who conned millions of pounds begins back in the 1960s, when two respected middle-aged businessmen open a nursing home in the south of England. Jim Miller and John Bellard have been together since university. They are intellectuals, interested in theology. They're also lay preachers, with friends high up in the Anglican Church. Miller is also a holistic therapist. He's clever, charismatic, a natural leader. Bellard is quieter, more reflective. He is the home's bookkeeper. The two men become local benefactors. They help the poor and give to charity. They are well liked in the local community. With the success of the home, Miller and Bellard begin to expand their business interests. They set up a company selling musical instruments and indulge their taste for fast cars by sponsoring racing events. The two men are now living the high life and enjoying every minute of it. Then, in September 1975, the mirror cracks. Miller and Bellard fail to turn up with the prize money at a race they've sponsored. The outcry reaches the ears of Norman Luck, crime reporter with Britain's Daily Express newspaper.
We had a telephone call from a number of people involved in motor racing at Brands Hatch, and they were a bit upset because their sponsor had vanished.
As soon as Luck begins to sniff around, he discovers that the missing sponsorship money is only the tip of a multi-million-pound fraud. Detective Constable David Fickweiler of the Sussex Fraud Squad is already on the case.
They had entered into thousands of finance agreements with various finance companies. The transactions allegedly were for the sale of organs to churches.
In the early 1970s, an electric organ can cost up to £5,000. Churches don't have that kind of money. And finance companies will only lend to individuals. So the charismatic Jim Miller persuades his friends and employees to do a good deed for a church by signing for a loan on their behalf. The church will then repay the loan from their organ fund. Jeff Green was one of the employees who signed for a loan.
You feel that you're in a small selective group that are just helping a few churches out. So on the face of it, that seemed okay.
Except that the churches are completely unaware of their involvement in the scheme. With a signed agreement, Miller and Bellard collect the money for the organ from the finance company, but don't deliver anything to the church.
There were many instances of the same organ being financed several times. So quite obviously it was total fraud.
At first, Miller and Bellard pay back the loans with new loans, so their friends feel reassured that their good deeds are working. And they sign more agreements. Eventually, the con men are forging their friends' signatures to borrow more money. Miller and Bellard end up borrowing over £5 million to pay for organs that are never delivered. When the two men have borrowed up to the limit, the finance companies begin to breathe down their necks, as it is their company supplying the organs. Miller and Bellard throw a farewell party and fly off for a holiday in France. 2 days later, a postcard is delivered saying they arrived safely. That is the last anyone hears of them. Shortly afterwards, Miller and Bellard's friends and employees suddenly find they are about to lose everything they possess if they don't repay the millions they have signed for. The con men have vanished, and the police have no idea where they are. So journalist Norman Luck and Detective Fickweiler decide to pool their resources to try to find them. But after a month, neither have made any progress. Then, one evening, a friend of Luck's suggests he might use the help of a psychic. Psychic Bob Cracknell is keen to use his abilities to help fight the crime.
I think Norman was extremely cynical at the time, you know. He was a hard-bitten journalist.
Bob meets Norman Luck at his home. The journalist shows him some photographs.
I think my first inference was that a church connection. I kept saying, you know, there's a church connection here all the way through.
Bob then surprises the journalist with accurate descriptions of the con men.
Now, this guy, he's the weak one of the two. He's got a gammy leg. And Norman said, how can you tell that from a photograph?
I was skeptical, of course I was. But there was nowhere else he could have got the information from. If he'd done some research on the situation beforehand, then possibly he would have known.
Then Bob's psychic abilities astound the skeptical journalist. He senses a powerful figure at the heart of the scandal, someone high up in the church who is being blackmailed.
I hadn't been told anything about the case, and I said, now there's a bishop involved. Form of blackmail of some description. It's a big fraud, but it's blackmail.
I was rather amazed because I didn't know how the hell he could have known that. That hadn't been released by the police, and it certainly hadn't been released by me.
Had the psychic uncovered the bizarre connection between two fugitive conmen and a blackmailed bishop? Bob doesn't know it yet, but he's about to embark on a journey that will change his life. Two respected businessmen in southern England have vanished after conning millions of pounds from hundreds of innocent people who now stand to lose everything. The police can find no trace of the fraudsters. Psychic Bob Cracknell is sure their whereabouts have something to do with the church. Crime reporter Norman Luck is dubious of Bob's abilities until the psychic mentions a blackmailed Anglican bishop.
He's an astute journalist, but I think the fact that I came up with this one thing, which he said, that's convinced me, nobody else, only I know that, I've only just found it out. And I think he said to me, you were reading my mind.
Luck has been told confidentially by the police of an embarrassing story at the heart of the crime. Miller and Bellard were close friends with an Anglican bishop who was having extramarital affairs.
Miller and Bellard were allowing this senior church person to use a chalet in the grounds for his various dalliances.
So, this is where
it all happened. And this obviously was the secret behind the whole lot.
Yes?
The reason they started the fraudulent transactions was to raise money to pay off what they said were a number of ladies of the night who were threatening to expose their relationship with a former Bishop of Guildford.
They had involved themselves in a financial scam, and with the proceeds, they were helping this senior church person to pay off blackmail demands.
But then the bishop died before repaying the money, leaving Miller and Bellard with a large debt. Could this have been the motive which led two men of impeccable character and no previous record into a life of deception and fraud? Staff at the home give Bob some articles of the men's clothing to see if he can sense their whereabouts.
From the
I don't think I believed it.
And I think that was when Norman got his second shock, when I said, they're here. And they said, where? I said, Scotland, Ullapool.
Ullapool is a fishing village on the west coast of Scotland. Where could the fugitive con men hide out in such a small place?
The whole thing that was getting me throughout was church. And I'm not talking about the church organs. The connection is with the church. I know it.
Miller and Bellard had always had a religious leaning. Apparently, they had often discussed becoming monks and joining a monastery.
That was possibly the church connection I was looking at. They were in some monastery. They were in some religious retreat.
But there is no monastery in or near Ullapool. Could he have gotten it all wrong? Detective Fickweiler, meanwhile, ransacks the nursing home searching for the money, but finds nothing. Could Miller and Bellard have taken it with them? The police interview everyone close to the con men. Of particular interest to them is Jeff Green, the manager of their racing sponsorships and one of their most trusted employees.
Well, my impression of Jeff Green was that he was one of those people that thought Miller and Bellard were genuine and nice people, real kindly people, and I think he had been, like everybody else, conned by them.
When Luck and Cracknell visit Jeff Green at his home in Brighton, he insists he knows nothing of the two men's whereabouts.
I thought Jeff Green came over as a fair, as genuine character, that he was just another victim of the Miller and Bellard situation.
After talking to Green, I was totally convinced. This man was lying. They were in Scotland. He knew. And he was able to contact them. Norman, however, hard-bitten journalist, stated quite simply, sorry, without evidence, we cannot pursue it. I was devastated. What could I do? How could I convince anybody?
Bob now faces a serious problem. How can he prove that Jeff Green knows where the two men are hiding? How does a psychic prove what amounts to no more than a feeling? He has only one option, to get the proof himself. Bob decides to go to the west coast of Scotland to try to find some evidence for what his psychic impressions are telling him.
That I had this absolute conviction of the connection with the church, and I began to think in terms of a church as a retreat. I thought, okay, it's on an island or somewhere like that.
He makes Ullapool his base. From here, he plans to search the islands off the coast. He immediately sets about questioning the hotel staff.
Doing my amateur Seamus bit, have you seen this man or this man or this man? I thought, well, you've got to start somewhere, you never know.
A couple of people seem to recognize the faces, but aren't certain. Bob then sets out to search the islands, showing the photographs to everyone he meets.
One of the ferrymen, he was quite genuine, and he said, oh, yes, I've seen this guy before, yeah. Quite genuine, which gave me excitement. So I'm beginning to feel that I'm on the track.
Bob's psychic abilities have got him on the trail of the con men. Will they lead him to their hiding place? But once out at sea, Bob's hopes take a dive. There are over 40 islands off the coast at Ullapool. Finding anyone out there who doesn't want to be found could take years.
With all these islands around you, where do you begin? I can well understand the reticence of the police. Can you imagine? They're listening to a guy who's been labelled a crank saying, an island off Ullapool. Yes, sir, we'll send a man out straight away. It's incredible.
All Bob's psychic feelings about the men's disappearance have had a strong connection to a church or a monastery. So once back on the mainland, Bob decides to explore this link. But the nearest monastery is over 100 miles away at Fort William.
There was two people hitchhiking along the road. So I stopped and gave them a lift, a young couple. They were heading for Glasgow. Something caused me to, for some unknown reason, take the photographs out and say, look, have you ever seen these two guys? And to my absolute amazement, the girl said, oh, yes. Recognize them both. Oh, do you remember where you saw them? Yes, at the Royal Hotel in Ullapool. That was it. I was convinced that that was the place. I was right.
The witnesses give Bob the evidence he needs. It seems his psychic powers are right after all. The con men are in Ullapool, exactly where he said they were. But is this enough for the police to catch them? Con men Miller and Bellard have disappeared after defrauding friends and employees of £5 million. The police have no idea where they are. Psychic Bob Cracknell is convinced the two men are hiding on an island off the west coast of Scotland. But no one believes him. So he goes there himself to look for them. And finds evidence that the fugitives are in the area. With renewed confidence, Bob returns to London with the names and addresses of his witnesses. He's sure the police can now catch the con men, and the Daily Express can print the story. But Bob's in for an unpleasant surprise. Back in London, Norman Luck and the Daily Express are not impressed.
That wasn't sufficient proof. You can't say, I think. You've got to either produce a body and say they are staying at so-and-so, so-and-so guest house. We have found the Southern Organ fraudsters. But that didn't happen.
After all his hard work, Bob hits a dead end. No one wants to listen. The con men will get away with it, and their victims will lose everything. His dream of a career fighting crime is fading fast.
I knew that I was right. It became a personal thing, you know. I really didn't know what to do. I'd gone out on this limb, whereas a psychic takes in all forms of vibrations, adverse and otherwise. When a psychic gets depressed, believe me, it's, it's doubly worse.
And then, as the case begins to go cold, Bob receives a final psychic clue about the con men's whereabouts.
I had a dream in which these two guys were living in a cave. In a desolate area, you know, definitely living in a cave. It was such a vivid dream. There was no question of doubt about it. I woke up convinced, as a result, that they had been living in a cave. Well, this is a bothy, as near to a cave as you can possibly imagine.
But the west of Scotland is peppered with these stone huts. How is the psychic going to convince anyone to search them all? Bob phones Norman, but the journalist is away. In desperation, he tells Detective Fickweiler about his dream. But Fickweiler's response to the idea that someone with £5 million would be living in a stone hut is less than enthusiastic.
We deal in facts. And if someone says, I think, I believe, I know things, well, then you ask them what they know. And if they can't come up with anything, why should one waste time pursuing it? Yeah, cynical, sceptical. Yeah, most coppers are. You deal in facts, and that's it.
The police are a funny breed. Unless it's written down or unless they can see it with their own eyes, they don't believe it.
It's now nearly a year since the con men have disappeared. Have they vanished into thin air? The police have exhausted all their avenues of investigation. Yet they still won't listen to a psychic. It'll take a lot more than a dream to convince them that Bob isn't a crank. And then a stroke of luck. Bob's persistence is vindicated. Jeff Green feels let down by his friends and employers, and the pressure from the finance companies demanding repayment has become too much to bear.
I trusted these guys. I thought, they'll be okay, they're going to come back. I know where they are, they're going to come back, they're going to put it all right, and so on. And of course, 2, 3 months, 4 months, getting into the 5th month, and nothing's happening. All these writs are flying. Your health goes down, your marriage breaks up, you're going to lose your house, and this makes you think about it all in a different way.
Green's account of Miller and Bellard's disappearance is extraordinary.
After landing in France, they made their way back on the ferry to Dover, where Jeff Green picked them up, drove them all the way up to the west coast of Scotland. From Ullapool, they set sail in 2 dinghies to an island called Priest Island.
Here was the church connection Bob had tried so hard to find. The 2 men were living in a stone hut on Priest Island, 4 miles off Ullapool. The psychic's powers were absolutely on target.
There's me chasing my backside on islands, connection with the church. Ullapool was the location. I was there. The living in the cave was correct. I believe Norman's headline story was living in a cave eating cockle soup. But now I would have, I would have gone and got an ordnance map of the whole area and checked it out. And Priest Island would have stuck out like a sore thumb, would it not?
It took us hours to get there, and when we got there, we were thrown up against some rocks because we couldn't control the boat. The seas were too rough. In the end, we were thrown into a small cove.
Green returned home, and the 2 con men, in their 50s, set up camp in the roofless stone hut. They stayed there for nearly 8 months throughout a sub-zero winter, perhaps to make amends for the chaos and misery they'd unleashed. The 2 spiritual swindlers simply turned their backs on the world.
They left everybody, and when you leave somebody that trusts you and has great faith in you and wants to still keep you in their lives, it's a terrible thing.
Why should he cover up for these people when he was one of their victims?
When Miller and Bellard ran out of money and provisions, they returned to the mainland and moved into a caravan. They phoned Jeff Green to send them more money. Their lack of contact before that and the fact that he and others had suffered so much in their absence incensed Green. He gave them up. At their trial, both men plead guilty. With no previous offenses, they are given 6 years each. The bishop's wife is still alive, so his name is never mentioned, and the millions, they say, were all spent repaying loans and enjoying a brief taste of the high life.
None of the money was recovered. There was no indication in the books and records as to where all the money had gone.
It seems Bob Cracknell's visions had been right from the start. The con men had returned to Britain from France and hidden on an island off the west coast of Scotland. Priest Island, due to its name, did have a connection with the church, and the 2 men had been living in a primitive stone dwelling, not entirely unlike a cave, and perhaps the pressure, psychic and otherwise, which Bob put on Jeff Green might even have encouraged his confession.
I think that possibly Green said, this guy's not going to let go. I can't take it.
This case changed Bob's life. He became known as the psychic detective and spent the next 30 years fighting crime.
Basically, you are aware of atmosphere, feelings, vibrations that the average person is not aware of. Like a radio, if you like, on shortwave. With all the crackling and noise going along, you've got to go along and tune it in.